Hello, and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 5th of September 2022. This week I am joined, as ever, by my fantastic co-host, Mr. Andy Brockman. Good afternoon, Andy. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Mark. Fine, except I think we're all living in some kind of strange hinterland, aren't we, at the moment?
Yeah. Well, we are no longer Neo-Elizabethans. That was always a term I found fascinating, particularly when it first occurred to me in high school that we must be Elizabethans living under the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. And then to hear that it was suggested in and around her coronation as well, that people were becoming Neo-Elizabethans, I found that quite pleasing. But ultimately, folks, we're here to have a little bit of a chat about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the death of a monarch, and the immediate accession, I think is the term, or to the throne of her son Charles III. We had planned on our continuing watching brief this week, touching on the outgoing culture secretary, the Minister for Culture, Media and Sport, and Digital, sorry, Nadine Dorries, and an investigation that's been ongoing for a little while into one of her more explosive and indeed her first act in office. But we'll come back to that next week, because this week it just didn't feel appropriate, really, to be having a poke at politicians. Not because Dorries deserves a day off, but because it feels more appropriate just to be thinking about what is genuinely history happening before us. And it feels as though, certainly I've been talking to people who are not that much younger than me recently, and basically confirmed millennials, as it were. I'm sort of elder millennial in that sense, and a lot of them have this feeling that they're living through multiple so-called once in a century, once in a lifetime, once in 1,000 year events, and I had to point out to them that this. They said if the Queen does go, this will be another one. And I said, well, actually, the death of a monarch didn't used to be that unusual. What's unusual is that she's been around for so long, and that she has reigned for living memory. Essentially, it's quite a thing to have achieved. And I suppose in terms of historiosity and a historic moment, that's worthwhile noting, isn't it? She is, I think you were saying, possibly the second most long-lived monarch, or
It
long-reigned
de
monarch.
it depends on the sources you look at.
Mm.
Egyptologists still argue about Pharaoh Pepin II, who uh, allegedly came to the throne at the age of 6 and lived to be 100.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, but his dates are contested. So, in terms of proven longevity as a monarch, Queen Elizabeth II did pretty well.
Mm. She did
Um,
very well.
yeah,
What what are we to make of this? Because it's interesting. These are times when historians are wheeled out like Hannibal Lecter, on on
Mark,
trolleys.
Mark. What you mean is that the media companies have been preparing for this for years and have
Hmm.
already contracted their talking heads, including historians and royal specialists on, to come
Oh,
and
not it.
and fill space on the screen.
Not in all cases. Not in all cases. Certainly yesterday there were a couple of historians caught off guard. Um,
Well,
but
yes,
nonetheless,
that's true.
nonetheless, they are rolled out and asked to give an immediate historical context to events, almost talking in a sort of a present tense about what will be the past, and in reference to previous events that they more often than not haven't seen for themselves. Again, no one alive has seen this. Most people alive haven't seen this happen before. Um, is this a time when the value of history is that bit closer to the forefront of people's minds, or do you think that this is just a role. This is history as the furniture of state almost.
That's a really interesting question. I think just a little bit of background maybe for people, and particularly anyone who's watching the Watching Brief who isn't living in the UK
Mm-hmm.
and isn't familiar with the way the UK unwritten constitution works.
Mm.
But basically, under the system in the UK, the monarch is the head of state.
Mm.
So it takes the role that President Biden takes in the United States, President Macron takes in France, and so on.
Mm.
There aren't that many monarchies left in the world. Most of the constitutional monarchies, most of them actually are in Northern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So most other countries have gone to some form of presidential system.
Yes.
But in the UK, the monarch is the head of state. So that when the Queen Elizabeth II died yesterday, immediately she died, her eldest son, Prince Charles, became King Charles.
Yeah.
The phrase is, the Queen is dead, long live the King. It's literally that quick.
Yeah.
There's no legislation. There is a formal process, but that's only to ratify what is convention. And the convention is, since yesterday, at some point yesterday when the Queen died, Charles became king immediately.
Yeah.
And at that point became the personification of the British state, and what are called the realms, which are the former colonial possessions of Britain, which still, although they're independent, maintain the monarch in London as a head of state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Australia, Canada, and other former dominions. So there's a lot of constitutional history really built around what's happened, and legacy and controversy, as we've seen play out on Twitter and some sources, some sources today. So we are living in a historical moment which references back to other historical moments, and particularly historical moments during the life of Elizabeth II, because when she was 21, she made a broadcast, a newsreel broadcast, where she said that she was going to devote her life, be it short or long, to service to our great imperial family. The British Empire was still just about in being there. And yet she lived to play host to President Nelson Mandela, to see the British Empire, quite, rightly most people would say, become a matter of history itself, and dissolve itself, and to see the royal family become multiracial, with a woman of mixed race, Meghan Markle, marrying into it a few years ago. So there's a lot of history and baggage, and then questions going forward about what's happened, which is, I think, why we felt it was worth addressing. Stepping back a little bit and looking at this is a historical moment. In terms of sheer historical moments, I don't think there's a precedent for a new head of government, a political head of government, being endorsed as Liz Truss, the new British Prime Minister, was on Tuesday, only for the head of state who constitutionally endorsed Liz Truss's appointment being dead within 48 hours. And there being and so that Liz Truss will serve under a completely new head of state. It's in terms of historical precedents and moments in history, it's pretty mind-boggling. It's like living through history on fast forward.
And that's why historians are seemingly looked to provide some element of commentary at times like this.
Absolutely, it's a moment that
back.
Yeah. And what's happened this week is so unprecedented. The woman who's been head of state for 70 years, whose 70th anniversary on the throne was celebrated internationally only a few months ago, is now gone in a moment completely unexpectedly. People knew that her health was failing. She was 96. She was a frail older woman, but this wasn't expected.
No. No.
And so everybody is now responding almost reflexively to, as I say, this unprecedented historical moment. It's quite remarkable.
And it's interesting in that sense that often the questions that follow was actually a question I was about to ask you, which I think actually is probably an unfair question to ask archaeologists and historians and the like, and that is how will Queen Elizabeth be seen in the future? In so much as obviously Elizabeth I, we're accustomed to seeing in a certain way, certain key moments in her life, and also the context before and after her reign, as part of the mythology, particularly in England, but also certainly of broader Britain and also Northern Europe. I think yesterday our former Prime Minister, thank God, Boris Johnson, suggested that she might be known as Elizabeth the Great at some point in the future. Um, I don't know really in that sense, but I think what I would say is that she, because of the sheer amount of change that she lived through, oversaw, in some cases mandated when it came to things like the implementation of relationships with new media, for example, and how to communicate with the world. She, on the one hand, started in for her reign at a time and in a place where, as you say, the imperial family, there was a far firmer class structure, both within the UK but also internationally. People had a sense of, throughout the empire, of where they were in this sort of, I mean, at the time, order of subject races. Even, people like Winston Churchill believed that stuff and conducted themselves accordingly. So,
Indeed, and in fact, it's worth pointing out that Queen Elizabeth's first prime minister, when she became queen, the prime minister was Winston Churchill,
yeah.
who, by all accounts, was somewhat besotted with her.
Mm,
He saw her as she was the new Elizabethan age. That Benjamin Britten famously wrote an opera around the time of the coronation called Gloriana.
mm,
It was celebrating Elizabeth I, but for the
mm.
reign of Elizabeth II. So yes, that baggage is absolutely there.
So it started there, and then it progressed, and then eventually, sometime in the mid '80s, I was born, and then then the world I knew then and know now, and we all are living in now, came to pass, and so I can't help but feel a certain amount of sympathy for people who have very mixed feelings on this event. It's a little bit like the poppies, isn't it? Every year in this country, people in other countries may not know, more or less, I guess, mid October, I suppose. People start, particularly on the BBC, but other broadcasters and other public events follow suit. People start wearing a red poppy on their lapel, in order to build up to the act of remembrance on the 11th of November. And some broadcasters notably have resisted that. They call it, poppy fascism or whatever. But there is this great wellspring, this sort of this tsunami of emotion that, in some cases, I would argue, isn't necessarily down to individuals. It is the group, it is the crowd, it is the herd that moves in certain directions, and things like poppies are, I think, annually are one of those things. For my part, I can see why the poppy is contentious for some. The red poppy, that is. Other people prefer other colours to mean different things. But also, I see the act of remembrance as you know. Secularly sacred in that sense. I think it's a very important thing to do. But how can we have dignified conversations about the fact that things were done in her name that did hurt people and that have hurt people? Well, obviously we can come onto the lovely and the good and the warm stuff that everyone is talking about. But I think this is possibly an opportunity just to touch on the fact that, so for example, I'm not going to share the image and I haven't retweeted it, but someone said, "Oh, look at this, 1952. There's a British officer here holding, content warning here, folks. Maybe skip ahead 30 seconds if you're a bit squeamish. Holding the heads of two Malaysian, I think, people who apparently were members of a communist movement that they tried to squash, photographed while she's on the throne. So there are contentious things, and I think in terms of responsible historiography, that's also got to be acknowledged. But how do we acknowledge it without having blazing rows? Because I do think that her government ultimately is her government and was her government, but also she didn't personally do this to people, and this is a loss of a human being. How do we balance that?
It's a very difficult question, and it ties in with the whole question of the relationship to the monarchy of people, particularly people on the political left. And to the situation that you've alluded to in Malaysia. I'd also add, for example, what's traditionally called the Mau Mau Rebellion in Kenya, the independence fights in Kenya, where there are now known to have been atrocities committed by British armed forces who swear allegiance to the Queen, not to the Constitution, because there isn't one, not to Parliament, not to the Prime Minister,
Not
to
to the
Queen.
flag.
Not to the flag. No. The Queen is the embodiment of state who people swear allegiance to. That doesn't mean, though, that the monarch has any executive role in those things that happen, that undoubtedly happen, and were undoubtedly wrong and shaming.
Yes.
So you get into very, very grey areas with all of this. It's interesting when I was prepping for this chat. I found and we'll post a link to it, but a tweet which was quoting an essay that was written by Clement Attlee, leader of the Labour Party, Prime Minister from 1945, possibly the most consequential left of centre politician Britain's ever produced, because he led the government which introduced the National Health Service, that nationalised steel, coal, the railways. Did all those things that traditional socialists had wanted to do for generations. Attlee oversaw that. But his argument was that he would prefer to have a constitutional monarchy where the monarch had no power, but personified continuity and identity, than a fixed-term president like the one that was like the system that's in the United States, which he argued was more monarchical than actually the British constitutional monarchy, in that you create somebody who has executive powers of a monarch for 4 years. And we're seeing how that's played out and is still playing out in relation to the incumbent, the presidency of Donald Trump.
But also, even if we step back from more recent controversies, the very fact that notably Richard Nixon said, when the president does something, it's not illegal. That's the language that got Charles I's head cut off.
Absolutely.
So as you say, these are four-year term monarchs in some ways.
And I could just interject there. Actually, there was some suggestion before it was confirmed last night by Clarence House, Prince Charles's King Charles's staff, that he would reign under the name of Charles III. There was a suggestion that he might reign under his regal name, might be one of his other given names, Philip, Arthur, or George, because Charles, to some extent, was unlucky in royal circles. The first King Charles ran full tilt into problems with Parliament and ended up having his head chopped off outside the Palace of Whitehall. And the second King Charles, although having sworn to be a defender of the faith, i.e. the Church of England, as well as having a very colourful private life, ended up converting to Catholicism on his deathbed. So there is historical baggage there.
But thankfully, we're not talking about a spring chicken here. He's in his 70s.
That's right. He's 73. He's the oldest person ever to accede to the throne of England.
Yeah. Now that's something else as well. Actually, that again, as a Welshman, I have to bring up here. Is he
Yeah.
and are they these monarchs? Are they the king or queen of England first and foremost, or are they the king of the United Kingdom?
Well, no, well, it's the United Kingdom of England, Scotland, Wales, and the Northern Ireland.
Right.
Technically, but yeah, you're into very murky constitutional waters there. He's yeah, as I said to earlier, he's king of the realms. You need to be a constitutional scholar, and I'm not, to be able to go into the full ramifications of all of this.
Well,
But
yeah, yes.
it's because England doesn't have a constitution, so
Yeah.
we can't point to this particular clause or that particular clause. It's all convention, and it's built up over centuries.
When you say England, you mean the United Kingdom doesn't have a constitution?
Both. This is the
Exactly.
complexity of it.
But it's interesting because, for example, I noticed that yesterday on YouTube, in particular yesterday evening, as you know, America was waking up. There was lots of stuff where people were saying the Queen of England is dead, and I'm like, well, she's not just the Queen of England, you know. That's
Yes.
But we all know that people get that wrong all the time, don't they? They call.
But
UK
to give you an idea how complex it is, there've been experienced journalists today who've either not picked up or not made the basic error of confusing state mourning, mourning as in being sorry that somebody's died, with and official mourning with royal mourning.
Yes.
Which is what is observed just by the royal family itself and its staff. So, for example, it was announced this morning that royal mourning would extend for a period after the Queen's state funeral, probably in about a fortnight's time, and it would extend for another week after that. And people were saying, "Well, the country can't come to a grinding stop for 3 weeks just because, very sadly, a constitutionally important and much loved and respected but older woman has died."
Yeah.
That's not what's happening. The country is basically carrying on as normal. If you read the advice that came from the Cabinet Office this morning, it's mostly discretionary. Organisations, shops, museums, theatres aren't being told to close even on the day of the funeral.
No.
It's being left to the discretion of individual organisations.
To be fair, a great many probably will choose to close.
Indeed, they will,
Yeah.
and in fact, they've already chosen to. For example, there's the football program tomorrow has been, and tonight and tomorrow, and over the weekend has been cancelled.
Yes,
and a lot of fans are very upset about that. Some of them had already booked train tickets and hotels for away games. Some of them are, and a lot of them are saying, "Well, look, in 1952, when the Queen came to the throne, the football program carried on." Is it more respectful to cancel the program or to have a minute's silence or a minute's applause and for teams to wear black armbands and for the national anthem to be sung before a game?
Yeah.
You pays your money and you takes your choice. We're into sort of complex moral areas here, and there will certainly be some people who are trying to shame people into visible mourning, as you talked about the poppy fascism. I wouldn't use the F word actually here, but there is certainly.
I was saying that's how that
some
particular
people
journalist has described it. Yes.
Yeah, sure. But there's. I think the other thing here is nobody really much under the age of 75 has any memory of anything like this happening at all.
No.
You'd have you have to have been about 5 to have any real memory of the coronation. At 5, you have to so that you'd have to be at least 75 or more. And the world now is completely different. We live in the world of instant social media, instant news, instant pylons. There was a Twitter, somebody, I think quite wisely, given the emotional charge of a lot of this, said yesterday when the news broke, and somebody is going to make a career-ending tweet in the next 24 hours.
Yes. Yeah.
By misjudging the mood completely, or saying
But
So go on.
the thing is, though, this is in many ways where this world of instant gratification media and insight into everyone's lives kind of began, arguably, was with moments in the mid 20th century, such as the Queen's coronation. It was, for lots of people, one of the first things, if not the first thing, they ever saw on a TV. You often hear stories about people borrowing a TV or buying a TV for the street so everyone could gather in one person's house to
In fact,
watch the
wasn't there
coronation.
wasn't there an episode of Doctor Who that was built around that?
There was, yeah, and this idea that
Yeah,
for
that
the
idea.
first time, all these people would have this thing in their houses that could
Mm.
influence them. Um, she has grown up and grown as a monarch. To say she did grow as a monarch with this sort of ramping up of technology and media and access and the pitfalls and perils that you're referring to as well, career-ending tweets and the like, um, candid microphone moments and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, some people are saying she never put her foot wrong. That's not true. She definitely did put her foot wrong every now and
Mm.
then. Most notably in and around the death of Diana. She could have read the room
I,
a bit more closely there. But then
that's
again,
true.
personally, she was also allowed to feel things. So again, in terms of this exposure to media and the fact that
Mm.
the public felt increasingly entitled to foist their emotional reaction upon the person of the monarch. Previous monarchs wouldn't have put up with that. They would have been, no, this is what I'm doing. She sort of felt as though she had to respond, for better or for worse. She's lived through tremendous change. She lived, sorry, through tremendous changes, and changes that I think, for the most part, the royal family are now set up to handle somewhat.
Look, okay, that's really interesting. Let's just interrogate that a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, she and the firm, as they call themselves,
Mm-hmm.
apparently,
Mm-hmm.
have, particularly from the 60s onwards, shown themselves to be quite reactive and responsive
Hmm.
to the media, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. If you
Mm-hmm.
look at what happened in the 1960s, um, there were a number of big moments. One was a documentary called Royal Family, which was commissioned by the BBC,
Mm-hmm.
and was groundbreaking. It showed the royal family having a picnic.
Hmm.
Showing them as a normal, looking like a normal middle class British family.
A, nor-
Out on a Sunday.
a normal, waited upon, um, incredibly privileged, but also highly staged royal family. Yes.
Exactly that, exactly that. But they're saying, we're not that different to, we might occupy this position, but we're not that different to you guys out there.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
and our lifestyle. There's the famous instance where a Daily Mirror reporter, I think it was, infiltrated the royal household got a job as a footman.
Mm-hmm.
And they ran stories, for example, that the Queen's breakfast cereal was lined up in Tupperware on a sideboard,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like a sort of cheap hotel. And
That sounds quite
uh,
luxurious to me.
yeah, but you live in the northeast.
That's true.
Uh,
Good point.
so no, in all seriousness, I did not mean that. I love the northeast. It's a great part of the world.
Okay, to be honest,
But
looking at how my webcam's behaving, yeah, I think maybe the technology is a bit behind the times up here. But anyway, go on.
anyway, look, no, in serious face.
Mm-hmm.
There was a very serious moment in the royal family in the late 1960s, which was the Aberfan disaster,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where a badly maintained slag heap that should never have been built where it was collapsed after a period of heavy rain and engulfed a large part of a village called Aberfan in the valleys, and killed. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was well over 100 people, most of whom were school children, because the main casualty of the event was the local primary school.
Buried, yeah. Mm.
That's right. It's an absolutely appalling event. Anybody, I mean, I can, I'm old enough just to remember the pictures on the TV news and how upset my mum was watching it,
Well,
because the kids were my age at the time.
Well, I mean, just up the road from from where I'm from. Literally just
Mm.
up the road, at the top of our road, there was a school in a place called Melodin, Gast Melid, which when they were doing lead mining at one point, there was an explosion. It was a controlled explosion. It was meant to have happened, but a
Mm.
chunk of rock that was not meant to broke away, flew across the village and actually went through the school roof. And that could have been a disaster. Thankfully, I think no one was hurt in that instance. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I mean, even that, things like, what at the moment the government is calling red tape, has come in during her reign. You know,
Mm. But the
but so gone.
yeah, but no, the key point about Abavan was that initially the Queen
Mm,
kept away.
yeah.
And there was pressure to go and visit, but she
Mm,
said no, because if I turn up, people will be wanting to look after me and not and that would distract them from the rescue operation.
yeah. Mm,
And eventually, she was persuaded that actually she needed to go because, as head of state and representative of the nation, she needed to be seen there needed to be seen there to care and emblematically to mourn for the rest
mm,
of the country.
mm,
And she did.
mm,
Now, arguably, she made the same mistake again over Diana, but that was to do with royal protocol. Diana was no longer a princess. She was no longer a member of the royal family. She divorced Prince Charles, so it wasn't a direct family issue. But one of the problems that the monarchy has had, and one of the great things that the monarchy has done, is that in the course of Queen Elizabeth's reign, it created basically a blank sheet of paper at the head of the state upon which the people of this country could write what they wanted the monarchy to be. And on
mm,
that occasion, they wanted the monarchy to represent their what their feelings on the death of what Tony Blair and his press secretary Alistair Campbell called the People's Princess. She was still a princess in people's minds, even if not in fact.
true, but also
And
also at the time, it should be said again, responsible historiography here. I
mm,
actually do remember waking up to her death in Diana's death in Paris,
mm,
and I also remember the newspapers that week, even the day before, had been slating her as being
oh yeah,
a lazy, neglectful mother who was gallivanting around with this
yeah,
Saudi man who owned Harrods or whatever. So actually, I think there was an awful lot of guilt happening at that point, and the people of this
mm.
country basically wanted to assuage their guilt by saying to the Queen, "You need to do better. You need to get down here and start mourning." It was very
And
complicated. Again,
absolutely, and yeah, absolutely, and it's fascinating if you read Tony Blair's autobiography, and if you read particularly Alistair Campbell's diaries and so on, and also watch the film The Queen that was made about that really tumultuous 10 days.
hmm,
Yeah, it's a remarkable period in modern history. But then, arguably, she and her back office operation, because obviously you can't separate these things, um, learned from those two situations when the Grenfell Tower fire happened.
hmm,
Um, Government, including the then Prime Minister Theresa May, kept away, or if they did visit, they kept it away from the cameras. The suggestion was that they didn't want to be identified with it because of and we're now finding in the inquiry that regulation or lack of it and lack of enforcement of it
hmm,
is possibly at the root of why Grenfell Tower burned in the way it did, and over 70 people died.
hmm,
Um, but while it was still raw, while the tower was still smouldering, the Queen turned up in full view of the cameras, met survivors and families, and was again taking on that role as the representative of the country, leading the mourning that for that appalling event.
hmm, hmm,
Um, so as I say, the perhaps the greatest feat of her 70 years in historical terms, it's way too early to start calling something calling her Elizabeth the Great.
yes,
And and you get the sense, given that it's coming from people like Boris Johnson, it's the same thing that people try and get a hashtag going. You know,
Elizabeth the Great distraction, one suspects, from someone like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's uh, you know, in a sense, her life is remarkable enough. You
Hmm.
know, her first prime minister was born in a Victorian. Her last prime minister was born and went to a comprehensive school.
Yeah.
Um, she met 14 American presidents.
Hmm.
She met Nelson Mandela. She
Hmm.
had a wedding present from Mahatma Gandhi.
Hmm.
The life's remarkable enough without you needing to embroider or attach sort of uh, hashtag to it. To be
Yeah.
frank,
Yeah.
which is what that kind of addendum to a politician or a monarch's name is really in historical. William the Conqueror. It's William hashtag the Conqueror.
Hmm.
That's the kind of shorthand we're talking about here, and you don't need it in this
No.
case.
No.
Um,
So, okay, and this in that spirit then of not needing to gild the lily too much, the
mm.
Lilibet too much. Um, uh,
Princess Lilibet too much, because one of the other functions of what's happened is that the children of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle become automatically Prince and Princess.
of course, yes, yeah. Everyone's shifted in rank, haven't they, within
Absolutely.
within the family? But yeah, bearing that in mind, then, how how can we how can we understand the instincts that people have to want to move seemingly backwards in terms of it? I'm trying not to be overtly
Mm.
political here because again we decided not to talk about Nadine Dorries, for example, today. But it's interesting how a person like this, and I'm not saying that she does represent everyone, and that her life has to be cherished by everyone and followed in terms of
Absolutely.
its
No,
progress by everyone.
no.
But given her how long lived she was, given that she's probably the most photographed, arguably the most famous woman on the planet,
Mm.
it's interesting that within her lifetime we see a whole host of people who want to see a mythological time come back again. I hinted at it there with this idea of increasing things like health and safety. Making sure you don't
Mm.
build an unstable slag pile near to a primary school, for example. It's precisely the sort of thing that at the moment people are looking to lessen because of this sense of, oh, in the past Britain. Doesn't need this. 2 world wars and 1 World Cup or whatever. All that sort of
Yeah.
nonsense that. And it's not Britain actually in this instance. It does in fact more often than not come from England actually.
Mm.
Uh, how do you think can we avoid if she's not going to be known as the Great, this monarch, this time, this sort of mid 20th to early 21st century period being a bit like the Concorde? This aeroplane that was supersonic and incredible feat of technology, but ultimately couldn't last, and now arguably we've taken a step back because it's deemed to be unsustainable somehow.
That's a really, really interesting question. I think, you know, um, what we have to hope is that King Charles, as you know, is
Hmm.
shows the same kind of sensitivity and political nous that the Queen showed visiting Ireland in the wake of the Good Friday Agreement.
Hmm.
It's the first visit to um, certainly the Republic of Ireland by a British monarch since independence.
Hmm.
Um, and there's a wonderful story been doing the rounds since yesterday evening of the Queen was due to deliver a speech in Dublin, and the President Mary McAleese, who was the President of Ireland at the time,
Hmm.
Republic of Ireland at the time, had sort of floated the idea and then dismissed the idea that the Queen Elizabeth would open her speech with a few lines of Irish
Hmm. Hmm.
as a real olive branch to Irish nationalism.
Hmm.
because Irish nationalists were swallowing the idea that the six counties were going to remain an independent, independent of the Republican part of the British,
Mm.
of the British system. So that was dismissed because oh no, it's too sensitive. It's too risky. Suppose she gets the pronunciation wrong, and so on and so on and so on. But President McAleese was persuaded to jot down, literally almost on the back of an envelope, what ideally she'd like the Queen to open with,
Mm-hmm.
open
Mm-hmm.
the speech with, in Irish. Those words found their way via a back channel, a diplomatic back channel, to the Queen and her staff. And what appears to have happened is that the Queen basically overrode the political advice, saw how effective something like that would be in holding out an olive branch to show things have really changed.
Mm.
And when she came to make the speech, without any warning to the Irish contingent, opened it with those lines pronounced faultlessly.
Yeah.
And if you look at the video, you can see President McAleese going almost, wow.
Mm.
And it's not wow, she's opening it in Irish. It's wow, she overrode the more cautious diplomats because she realized how important that was.
Mm. Mm.
So you hope that Prince Charles, King Charles, this is the thing, I'm not a royalist by any stretch.
Mm.
And we can, if you want to, you can ask me why. But for the
Well, no, go ahead. Why? Go on.
Well,
Since we're talking about it.
No, I'm not a die in the ditch royalist.
Mm-hmm.
There are many reasons why such a system is, there's a democratic deficit, and there's all the baggage of history. But I'm with Clement Attlee. I'd rather have a constitutional monarch with no power than President Johnson, Executive President Johnson.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, and I've said this before on Watching Brief. I'm not a rabid royalist either, again, by any means. But I do, obviously, I appreciate history. What? No, but also I have a.
I'll finish up with that in a minute, actually.
But also I have a respect for the role that she has performed. She only took 2 days off a year from her role in basically sanctioning and overseeing government actions and papers and so on and so forth. She'd get the red box wherever she lived or was living at the time across the globe. She in terms of a functional element of the Constitution, she did a damn good job, and as you say, we can only hope that for as long as it lasts in this form, that the next monarch does the same. I think I do find myself, though, just taking a moment just to think that, as you say, things like she during her reign, things like the NHS came about. Just 2 weekends ago, my life was saved by the NHS. And I don't want to harp on about that in this video necessarily, but or in this recording necessarily, but prior to that, I probably wouldn't have made it through the day on that day. Certainly not without great cost, or indeed, again, access to doctors. The whole world has changed, both during her reign, but also now, as you say, as you were going to say, that we have to get used to calling Prince Charles III, for example, or King Charles at the very least. But I can't help but think that I'm a little bit disappointed by the amount of people who are being very churlish about this idea of, oh, an old lady's died, so what? I mean, that's just not the case. This is a person who history will know existed, and in the same breath as William the Conqueror, King Henry VIII, Elizabeth II will be there. And so I think that's a bit disingenuous of some people to say, oh, whatever, it's just another Thursday. It wasn't. That said, though, I think we have deliberately touched on the fact that there are problems. There were problems. There
Mm.
have been problems.
Oh yeah,
There continue to be
yes.
problems with Britishness
Mm.
and British identity. And
Mm.
just before we come back to your point about getting used to the idea of Charles III and history and this sort of stuff, I suppose one thing that I hope our colleagues continue to do is continue to make the case for accurate representations of the past.
Mm.
Don't let her reign be sugar-coated. Don't let
No.
it be an unalloyed, golden shiny thing, but rather let the patina be part of it. Allow the reality to show, and don't let people make the same mistakes that they currently make. For example, about the Second World War. Oh, we fought alone, all that sort of stuff.
Mm.
Don't let them do that. Continue to tell accurate history and continue to hold on to that for
Mm.
the good of the nation, because she was certainly aware of failures and failings, and I mean, arguably one of the biggest was made in the past couple of years with her son Prince Andrew. Again, I don't think we should go into that right now, but remember it. That's the point. That's the whole job
Yeah.
of history and historians. It's not just to sort of be here at the passing of a monarch and to say, oh yes, well, she would have loved that kind of thing.
Mm.
There's a way of talking about this stuff that's appropriate, and hopefully, I think we've got somewhere close to that today. Anyway, what were you going to say?
Well, I'd just like to finish up really by we began by talking about the British non-constitution and the Queen is
Hmm.
dead, long live the King. I think it's worth having a word about King Charles III.
Hmm.
Obviously, this is somebody, and if you think of it, it's one of the ironies of the system of the system of hereditary monarchy. One of the madnesses of it, actually, that somebody can spend their entire what will be a normal working life preparing for a job, which
Hmm.
they only take on when most other people will have retired and be looking forward to putting their feet up and going fishing and spending time with the grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Charles III's working life began yesterday,
Hmm. Yeah.
and he's 73.
Hmm.
At the same time, he's a very interesting man. He's the first member of the royal family to become monarch with a university degree.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
he's also been a Royal Naval officer, commanded ships and so on, but his degree was from Cambridge, and his first part of Cambridge Tripos was archaeology and anthropology. He was studying archaeology at Cambridge when the Disney professor of archaeology was the great prehistorian Graham Clark.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Well,
so
that's pretty cool. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Obviously, he's outspoken in his somewhat traditional views about architecture.
Mm-hmm.
You agree or disagree. I mean, he famously described the proposed Sainsbury wing of the National Gallery as a monstrous carbuncle on the face of an old and much loved friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, okay. Many architects and others would agree with him on principle, disagree with him on principle on that.
Mm-hmm.
Others would agree and say, he's provoked a necessary debate.
Mm-hmm.
Others would say he should keep well out of things. There was
Mm-hmm.
the famous case of the spider letters, which the press have spent years trying to get released under freedom of information legislation, where he was seen to be directly lobbying ministers with his own views about particular issues. The argument being that the constitutional monarch shouldn't take part in those kind of debates.
Right.
Certainly shouldn't be seen to take part in those kind of debates.
No. Mm.
Or if they do take part in those debates, it should be in public, not hushed up in private under the idea that the conversations between the monarch, the royal family, and politicians should be kept secret.
Mm.
And I think the other one, I mentioned earlier that Charles II, on his deathbed, converted to Catholicism, although he was sworn to defend the Church of England,
Mm.
as defender of the faith, the title that was given to Henry VIII, ironically by the Pope before the dissolution of the monasteries and the schism.
Yeah, depending
But
of a faith.
well, this
Yeah.
is the thing. I mean, Charles was on the record in the past as saying he wanted to be a defender of faith, not the faith. In
Mm.
other words, defending people's religious rights, and he's shown a particular interest, for example, in discussing Islam.
Mm. Mm.
And so, yeah, and obviously that those are all very public issues, very contentious issues, and this is before we get onto his issues on his stances on green issues. You know, he was speaking up for the environment before it was fashionable. Somebody pointed out, that he was almost woke before woke was coined as a phrase.
Well, to be fair, in terms of how people have spoken about him and written about him in the newspapers, he was definitely a Greta Thunberg character before there was a Greta Thunberg.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think, in terms of his background intellectually, it'll be a very interesting. I think whatever, however he handles the role, it'll be different to the way his mother handled the role. Different. Obviously, there's a generation difference, there's experiential difference, and certainly the political world is changing very rapidly again. And we're in the middle of an unprecedented crisis, both economically and climatically. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he performs the role. We might get a better idea how he might approach it. He's making a speech to the public at 6 o'clock this evening. We'll see what he says.
Yeah, addressing the nation.
Yeah.
On that note, then, maybe this is where I'd like to finish. It's a question, and maybe this is where we can have a conversation in the comments below, as well. We're about to see an extraordinary state pomp and ceremony machine roll into action. We're about to see a colossal amount of money spent and a tremendous amount of well-rehearsed behaviors, micro actions, ceremonies, phrases, so on and so forth deployed at a time when in other countries at other times such actions might have resulted in revolution. In so much as people...
Are we about to reach a revolutionary moment this winter?
Well, are we? I mean, in that sense, what is going to happen? Is Britain so accustomed to not complaining in that sense that we'll just sort of muddle through, or do they actually have to be really bloody careful here? Because if it's this. And yet the thing is, if they don't do it, the Brits will complain. If they do it, the Brits will complain. So what's going to happen? That's my question.
Okay.
Sorry, I should just say, just for people who don't know, in the context of tremendous inflation up to 20% plus electricity bills going, energy bills going through the roof. So go ahead.
Yeah, shortages of food in the shops and all sorts of other things. Look, one advantage, and Attlee pointed out in his essay, of having a hereditary monarch with no political power is that they can represent continuity where the politicians whose view is shorter term can be a target for if you want to try and force change. So the monarchy continues like that while the politicians can fight like cat and dog underneath. And
like a swan on a carp pond.
Yeah, if you want to put it like that. Look, I think, are we close to a revolutionary moment in terms of overthrowing the monarchy? People have been pointing out this morning that one of the most militant trade unions and most effective trade unions, the RMT, the Railway, Maritime and Trade Train Union, which has been striking recently on the railways, has cancelled its next 2 strikes because they fall within the period of mourning and the period when the funeral might be taking place. That's how, if the most militant of a trade union can cancel strike action out of respect for the monarchy, it's read the room. If there's a revolutionary moment, it won't be over the monarchy, it'll be over the way the government behaves. And arguably we saw that, and the monarchy survived it in the poll tax rebellion. And I don't think it's too fine a point to call it a rebellion, because people were refusing to pay and there was a riot in Trafalgar Square, and that brought down Margaret Thatcher. It didn't bring down Elizabeth II,
No, no.
and never even threatened to.
Yeah. Well, and again, we're not going to get political, but we've already seen stuff happening that could be Truss's equivalent of a poll tax already in a matter of days. So it's we'll see.
We'll save that. We'll save that for another time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for watching at home. Hopefully, we have walked this path as carefully as we hope to. As I say, please do have a conversation below. Please do comment below. Please do keep the conversation as civil as possible. And we'll see you next week with the planned program, I think, from this week, and a rather interesting conversation to be had there about the outgoing culture secretary, but also as well a local mayor, as well, a northeastern local mayor.
Absolutely, it might go boom.
It might go boom. Yeah. There's a long story to tell. Okay, right. That's such a bad pun. No, why did I make that pun? No, guys, no. It's Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.